I once believed that growing food was a privilege reserved for people who could follow the sun. Like so many devoted gardeners, I spent years dreaming of broad, south-facing fields bathed in 10 uninterrupted hours of fierce summer light. The kind of golden warmth that turns tomatoes red and fills basil leaves with sweet, fragrant life. Then life brought me here, to a charming townhouse with a tiny backyard facing north. The first time I stepped into this garden, my heart sank. Tall walls enclosed it on every side, while a huge, ancient oak stretched its branches overhead, covering almost the entire space in deep, cool shade. Well, I told myself with a heavy sigh, that's it. No vegetable garden for me. Have you ever felt the same way? Have you ever looked at the shadowed corners of your yard, a shaded balcony, or a concrete patio surrounded by high walls, and assumed those places were useless for growing food? It is easy to fall into the trap of garden perfectionism, comparing our small, shaded spaces with endless commercial fields glowing beneath full sun. But nature is a master of adaptation, and a garden may be one of the finest cures for perfectionism. One day, as I sat on my shaded patio and felt the cool breeze lowering the surrounding temperature by 15 to 20 degrees, a realization came over me. Some of the most beautiful, resilient, and delicious things on earth do not long for a harsh, relentless spotlight. They prefer the gentle touch of morning sun, the peaceful softness of dappled light, and the cool moisture held within the shadows. They do not demand attention. Instead, they quietly and patiently put their strength into their roots. That was when I discovered the magic of shade-tolerant perennial vegetables. Unlike annual crops that require constant care, sowing and replanting year after exhausting year, these lasting plants can be planted once and return to reward you for many years to come. And when we grow them in containers, an extraordinary world of urban microclimates opens before us. We can move the pots to follow the changing seasonal light, protect sensitive roots from waterlogged soil, and transform bare concrete balconies into lush, edible sanctuaries. Today, I want to guide you on a deeply personal journey through my shaded container garden. Together, we will count down 10 remarkable perennial vegetables that do more than simply tolerate shade. They truly thrive in it. Along the way, we will explore the precise methods that keep them healthy and productive in pots. And perhaps we will also discover a few timeless lessons these quiet green survivors can teach us about our own lives. Let us begin. 1. Caucasian Mountain Spinach, Hablitzia tamnoides, the art of reaching higher. We begin our countdown at number 10 with a genuine botanical marvel, Caucasian Mountain Spinach, scientifically known as Hablitzia tamnoides. Native to the damp, temperate understory of Europe's Caucasus forests, it is the only species in its entire genus, a solitary climber that has perfected the art of surviving by growing upward. Unlike ordinary annual spinach, which quickly bolts, becomes bitter, and dies when summer heat arrives, Hablitzia is a remarkably cold-hardy perennial capable of surviving winter temperatures as low as -30 degrees Celsius. Each early spring, while the earth is only beginning to awaken, Hablitzia produces an abundance of tender shoots and heart-shaped leaves. Their flavor is surprisingly sweet and mild, without the sharp, astringent bitterness often associated with leafy greens. It is also a vigorous climber, reaching 9 to 12 feet in a single growing season by wrapping its leaf stems around any support within reach. To grow this woodland climber successfully in a container, you must understand its physical needs. Hablitzia is sensitive to sudden changes in soil moisture, so I strongly recommend choosing a non-porous container made from glazed ceramic or sealed cement. A porous terracotta pot can dry too rapidly in the wind, causing the vine to wilt. Select a container that holds 15 to 20 liters of soil, then fill it with rich organic loam that drains freely while maintaining cool, steady moisture. Hablitzia prefers a neutral to slightly alkaline pH between 6.5 and 7.5, so mixing a handful of agricultural lime into the soil each autumn is an excellent way to keep the growing medium sweet. Growing this plant from seed is a true lesson in patience. Its seeds remain deeply dormant and need a process known as cold stratification. I wrap mine in moist paper towels, seal them inside a plastic bag, and place them in the refrigerator for 30 days to imitate a winter in the forest. Once they finally germinate and begin climbing, you can harvest the tender spring shoots when they reach about 10 to 15 centimeters in length, allowing the roots below to become stronger with every passing year. Hablitzia offers us a beautiful lesson about limitation. It cannot hold itself upright without help. To rise, it needs a trellis, a wall, or the branches of a nearby shrub. Yet it never treats that dependence as a weakness. Instead, it wraps its leaf stems around whatever support is available, climbing out of the deepest shade until it finds its place in the light. When difficult circumstances cast shadows across our own lives, are we willing to reach out? Are we humble enough to accept the support of our community, our friends, and the people we love, so that together we can rise higher than we ever could alone? 2. Hostas. Hosta SPP. Redefining our purpose. At number 9, we encounter a plant that may already be growing in your garden, yet remains almost entirely unrecognized for its greatest gift, the hosta. For generations in the West, hostas have been treated only as ornamental foliage plants, admired for their lush, variegated leaves and their effortless beauty in dark garden corners. But in the mountainous forests of Japan, hostas have been treasured for centuries as a prized sansai, or wild mountain vegetable, known locally as urui. Yes, hostas are not merely edible, they are truly delicious. In early spring, they rise from their dormant winter rhizomes as tightly curled, spear-shaped shoots known as hostan. When harvested in the morning, while still crisp and full of moisture, these shoots taste like a delightful blend of sweet asparagus and mild spring onion. Their tender, layered texture becomes an exceptional delicacy when lightly pan-seared in butter with a small splash of soy sauce. Growing hostas in containers is one of the most rewarding shortcuts a gardener can take. These plants are exceptionally tough, long-lived perennials, hardy from USDA zones 3 through 9. Their strong, fibrous root systems allow them to live happily in pots for decades. Choose a medium-sized variety such as the award-winning heavily ruffled curly fries or the striking Patriot, and plant it in a 12 to 15-liter container with excellent drainage. Hostas flourish in rich soil filled with humus and prefer a slightly acidic pH between 5.5 and 6.5. To harvest hostan at its finest, you can use a traditional method known as blanching. Early in spring, before the shoots emerge from the soil, cover the crown with a loose mound of leaves or place an upturned dark pot over it. By excluding the light, you prevent the development of tough green chlorophyll and bitter woody growth. The shoots that emerge will be pale, exceptionally tender, and almost melt in your mouth. Even the summer flowers can be harvested, adding a gentle peppery crunch to fresh salads. However, while hostas are a nourishing treat for people, their saponins are toxic to cats and dogs, so these containers should be kept safely raised on pedestals. The hosta encourages us to question our assumptions. For decades, we looked at this plant and saw nothing more than attractive foliage, completely unaware of the nourishment it had been offering all along. How often do we make the same mistake with ourselves and those around us? How often do we confine people to narrow, superficial roles, forgetting that beneath an ordinary and quiet exterior may lie a deep reserve of unrealized potential, waiting for the right season to be revealed? 3. Ostrich fern, Matachia struthiopteris, the ancient, patient sentinel. At number 8, we travel backward through time with a living fossil, the ostrich fern, or Matachia struthiopteris. This magnificent structural plant belongs to a lineage more than 300 million years old. Plants from the age of dinosaurs that witnessed continents shift and countless seasons pass with silent, unwavering resilience. In the wild, they spread across moist, shaded riverbanks and cool woodland floors. In the garden, they stand like elegant chartreuse sentinels, bringing the ancient peace of the forest into even the most lifeless concrete surroundings. Yet the ostrich fern is far more than a visual masterpiece. Foragers and chefs prize it for its spring harvest of fiddleheads, the tightly coiled young fronds whose shape resembles the carved neck of a violin. Gathered when they are only a few inches tall, fiddleheads have a fresh, crisp taste that combines the wild flavors of asparagus, spinach, and broccoli. Because ostrich ferns form wide networks of underground rhizomes and can grow as tall as 6 feet, they require a generous home. Do not choose a container smaller than 25 to 30 liters. A deep, broad fabric pot or a heavy glazed container with large drainage holes is ideal, giving their thirsty roots enough room while preventing waterlogging. Fill it with a potting mixture that recreates the woodland floor, rich in organic compost, decomposed leaves, and pine bark. Maintain a moist, acidic to neutral pH between 5.5 and 6.5. Ferns depend on abundant moisture, so the potting medium must never be allowed to dry out completely. When collecting fiddleheads, we must respect the law of the forest. Never harvest more than half of the emerging shoots from any single crown. The remaining fronds must be allowed to open, photosynthesize, and restore the plant's strength for future seasons. Fiddleheads must also be washed carefully and cooked thoroughly before eating, either boiled for 10 minutes or steamed for 20, to neutralize their natural defensive compounds. The ostrich fern has endured mass extinctions, ice ages, and the relentless advance of human civilization by remaining flexible, patient, and deeply rooted. It never rushes. It simply waits through the harshest winters, holding an unshakable certainty that spring will eventually return. When the winters of our own lives seem endless, and the shadows around us become heavy, can we draw upon that same ancient patience? Can we trust that our roots are still holding firm, and that, beneath the frozen surface, our own tightly curled potential is quietly waiting for the right moment to unfold? 4. Sea kale, Crambe maritima, the discipline of the sea. At number 7 stands a true legend of the British coastline. Sea kale, or Crambe maritima. This is a plant shaped by the elements themselves. Growing along Europe's harsh, shifting shingle beaches and gravel-covered shores, sea kale developed thick, waxy, blue-gray leaves that resemble pieces of ocean coral, perfectly formed to endure salty winds, poor soil, and dazzling sunlight. Yet when placed in the partial shade of a container garden, it becomes an architectural masterpiece, producing clouds of honey-scented white flowers in summer and extraordinarily luxurious edible shoots in spring. Victorian gardeners were fascinated by sea kale. They forced the plants in dark glass houses to create tender, pale lavender and white stalks, which were served as a rare delicacy with a rich, nutty taste. Blanched sea kale has an exquisite flavor, sweeter and more refined than asparagus, with a satisfying watery crunch that becomes unforgettable when steamed and finished with melted butter. To grow this coastal survivor in a container, you must respect its deep and powerful taproot. Choose a large pot with a capacity of at least 30 to 40 liters. I prefer heavy concrete containers or modular fiberglass planters because their weight prevents this substantial plant from toppling. The potting mixture should imitate the gravelly shoreline. Combine peat-free compost, sharp sand, and pea shingle in a ratio of 3:1, maintaining a slightly alkaline pH between 7.0 and 8.0. Sea kale is remarkably easy to begin from root cuttings known as thongs, which are planted vertically in early spring. But this is where the plant demands complete discipline. 3 golden rules must be followed. First is the year 3 rule. Do not harvest a single shoot or leaf during the first 2 years. Allow the plant to grow freely, directing all of its energy into developing a massive taproot. Second is the 1/3 rule. When you begin forcing the shoots beneath a dark bucket in the 3rd year, never remove more than 1/3 of them. Third is the summer shutdown. Remove the dark buckets by late May and end the harvest completely, allowing the large summer leaves to restore the roots for the winter ahead. The discipline of sea kale offers a profound reminder of the beauty found in restraint. In a world that constantly demands immediate results, this plant asks us to wait. It requires us to strengthen our foundations before we even consider taking a harvest. What are we building in our lives today that we feel tempted to rush? Can we find the strength to allow our roots to deepen, protect the energy we need, and trust that the sweetest and most enduring rewards are those given enough time to mature? 5. Good King Henry, Blidum bonus Henricus, the Forgotten King. At number 6, we honor a forgotten ruler of the European kitchen garden, Good King Henry, also known as Blidum bonus Henricus. For centuries, before modern spinach was developed and spread across our fields, Good King Henry reigned as the undisputed king of the cottage garden. This ancient perennial pot herb, closely related to amaranth, was cultivated as a reliable source of everyday nourishment. It is remarkably resilient, producing generous harvests of tender, spinach-like leaves from spring through late summer, even in the dry, shaded ground beneath trees, where many other crops would quickly wilt and disappear. Good King Henry provides 2 distinct harvests, In early spring, its thick young shoots can be gathered and cooked like asparagus, which earned the plant its traditional name, poor man's asparagus. Later in the season, its arrow-shaped leaves can be picked continuously, offering a rich, savory green filled with iron and vitamin C. To grow this royal herb successfully in a container, you must avoid one serious beginner mistake, allowing the young seedlings to become root-bound. Good King Henry develops a deep taproot very quickly. If those roots begin circling the bottom of a small starter tray, the plant can enter a permanent state of stagnation, and its growth may remain stalled forever. Move the seedlings gradually into larger pots, filled with rich, moisture-retentive loam at a neutral pH between 6.0 and 7.5, eventually placing them in a 12 to 15-liter container. Position the pot where it can receive soft morning sunlight and cool afternoon shade. Because the leaves naturally contain oxalic acid, they are best steamed or lightly boiled instead of eaten raw. Cooking reduces their bitterness and transforms them into a rich, buttery side dish. Good King Henry was pushed aside and forgotten when modern agriculture chose fast-growing, uniform annual spinach instead. Yet annual spinach bolts and dies as soon as summer heat arrives, while the forgotten king remains steadfast, returning year after year with quiet and effortless reliability. How often do we abandon the slow, steady, and dependable relationships or values in our lives while chasing the next bright but temporary trend? Can we find the wisdom to recover those time-tested grounding truths and give them a lasting place within our hearts? 6. Ramps and ramssons. Allium spp. The magic of woodland ephemerals. At number 5, we breathe in the unforgettable wild fragrance of the spring forest through ramps and ramssons. Ramps, or Allium tricoccum, are native to the hardwood forests of North America, while ramssons, or Allium ursinum, spread across the ancient woodlands of Europe. For gourmets and food lovers, the arrival of wild garlic is almost a sacred occasion. Its broad, tender leaves combine the sweet, rich sharpness of spring onions with the earthy intensity of fresh garlic, making them an exceptional ingredient for wild pesto and savory tarts. What makes these plants so valuable to container gardeners is the environment in which they evolved. They are spring ephemerals, rising beneath the shaded crowns of deciduous trees, where they absorb cool, damp, filtered light, before the forest canopy fully opens. Plant wild garlic directly into an open garden bed, however, and you may soon find yourself facing a struggle. These plants are extremely prolific self-seeders. Once established, they can spread like a slow green tide, gradually taking possession of entire areas. Growing them in containers is an ideal permaculture solution, allowing you to enjoy their culinary magic while keeping their vigorous colonies safely contained. Choose an 8 to 10-liter pot or a broad, shallow wooden trough. Fill it with a growing mix that resembles the rich organic floor of a woodland, heavily amended with compost and shredded autumn leaves to maintain cool, damp conditions and a pH between 6.0 and 7.0. The most dependable way to begin is by planting dormant bulbs in autumn or using in-the-green plants in early spring. Keep the soil consistently moist and never allow the container to dry out, even during summer dormancy when the foliage disappears beneath the soil. Wild garlic teaches us why boundaries are essential. In open ground, with nothing to restrain it, its natural strength can become overwhelming and crowd out more delicate forms of life. Yet within the clear and healthy limits of a container, it grows beautifully, directing its energy into a concentrated and nourishing gift. Are we creating clear boundaries within our own lives? Are we protecting our time, our energy, and our hearts, allowing our passions to develop into a beautiful harvest instead of spreading into a tangled forest of exhaustion and overwhelm? 7. Chinese artichoke. Stachys affinis. Treasures hidden beneath. At number 4, we dig below the surface to discover one of the most charming and delicious secrets of the shade garden, the Chinese artichoke, also known as cruz or Stachys affinis. A member of the mint family, this low-growing bushy perennial is remarkably easy to cultivate, happily spreading its dense green foliage through the partial shade beneath taller plants. Yet throughout the entire summer, the plant's true magic remains completely hidden. When winter arrives and frost causes the stems to wither and die, the treasure hunt finally begins. Beneath the soil, you will find small, pearly white tubers, measuring roughly 2 to 5 centimeters long, shaped like tiny spiral seashells or delicate little gourds. Their texture is extraordinary, astonishingly crisp and crunchy, with a sweet, nutty flavor resembling a refined combination of water chestnuts, sunchokes, and artichoke hearts. Growing Chinese artichokes in containers is a brilliant choice. Because they spread through underground stolons, a pot prevents them from wandering into neighboring growing spaces while turning the winter harvest into a simple pleasure. Instead of searching through cold, frozen garden beds, you only need to tip the container over and allow the loose soil to fall away. Choose a 15 to 20 liter pot measuring at least 30 centimeters across. Then fill it with light, highly porous sandy loam. If the soil is too heavy or compacted with clay, the delicate tubers will struggle to develop and may become distorted. Plant the starter tubers 5 centimeters deep in spring. Keep the soil moderately moist and allow the foliage to enjoy the cool, shifting light. During the winter harvest, save several of the smaller tubers and return them to the container. They will rest quietly through the freezing weather and begin growing again when spring returns. The Chinese artichoke reminds us how dangerous it can be to judge only by appearances. Throughout summer, the plant looks like a modest and unremarkable green bush. It offers no dramatic flowers and no towering stems. Yet deep within the dark and silent earth, it is quietly creating a treasure filled with remarkable beauty and sweetness. How often do we overlook the quiet, invisible work taking place within us simply because the outside world cannot see it? Can we find the faith to continue growing in silence, trusting that our most beautiful and nourishing transformations are unfolding deep within the unseen spaces of our souls? 8. Mitsuba, Cryptotania japonica, the quiet fragrance of the forest. Our journey now brings us to number 3, a culinary icon of East Asia, ready to add a refreshing touch of herbal elegance to your shade garden. Mitsuba, or Cryptotania japonica. Often called Japanese parsley, the name Mitsuba literally means 3 leaves, referring to its soft, beautiful trefoil foliage carried on long, slender, translucent stems. Mitsuba holds a place in Asian cuisine, much like parsley does in the West, but its flavor is far more complex. A fresh, clean herbal blend of celery and flat-leaf parsley, lifted by bright hints of cilantro and lemon peel. Mitsuba is a true woodland plant, naturally growing along cool, damp, deeply shaded forest margins. Force this delicate herb into harsh, direct afternoon sunlight, and it will immediately protest. Its leaves will turn yellow, its stems will grow tough and stringy, and the plant will rush to seed in a desperate attempt to survive. But in the cool shade of a north-facing balcony or patio, Mitsuba is perfectly content, holding on to its lush, emerald green beauty throughout the year. Because Mitsuba remains compact in containers, reaching only about 25 centimeters tall, it is an ideal choice for gardening in small spaces. A simple 5 to 8 liter pot with generous drainage is all it needs. Fill it with rich organic potting soil packed with compost and capable of holding moisture well, then feed it once a month with diluted fish emulsion to encourage soft, succulent growth. When harvest time arrives, do not remove only a few individual leaves. Wait until the stems reach about 15 to 20 centimeters tall, then give the entire plant a clean haircut by cutting straight across, 5 centimeters above the soil. This encourages the dormant growth points around the base to burst into a fresh, dense flush of new foliage. And remember, never cook Mitsuba. Heat quickly destroys its delicate volatile oils. Instead, chop the tender leaves and juicy stems while fresh, then scatter them over soups, noodles, and rice bowls as a fragrant raw garnish just before serving. Mitsuba gently reminds us that we cannot force ourselves to flourish in surroundings that are hostile to our nature. It does not struggle to adapt to the scorching sun. Through its yellowing leaves, it simply tells us that it belongs in the cool and peaceful shade. Are we forcing ourselves to thrive beneath a high-pressure, highly exposed kind of sunlight that is slowly burning away our spirit? Can we find the courage to seek our own cool, quiet woodlands, the gentle places and relationships where our true fragrance can unfold without fear? 9. Lovage, Levisticum officinale, standing tall in shifting winds. At number 2, we meet a true giant of the herb world, Lovage, or Levisticum officinale. It was deeply valued by the ancient Greeks and Romans, who chewed its seeds to support digestion and used its deodorizing leaves to soothe the tired feet of travelers. Lovage later became a familiar presence in medieval kitchen gardens. Today, this forgotten treasure is gradually finding its way back into gourmet restaurants. Every part of this magnificent plant is edible. Its deep roots can be cooked as a savory root vegetable. Its seeds can be used as a warm baking spice, and its strong, hollow stems can even serve as unusual natural straws for cocktails. But the true stars are its lush, feathery leaves, filled with a powerful, concentrated flavor somewhere between celery and parsley, bringing remarkable depth to soups, broths, stews, and salads. Growing a plant that can rise more than 6 feet tall in a container may sound nearly impossible. Yet with the right vessel, Lovage performs exceptionally well, returning early every spring with generous armfuls of fresh, fragrant foliage. You must choose a very large, heavy container with a capacity of at least 40 to 50 liters. Lightweight plastic pots are an invitation to disaster. The towering stems catch the wind like sails, and one strong gust can easily send the entire plant crashing to the ground. Instead, use a heavy wooden half-barrel or a thick ceramic pot, then fill it with deep, rich, sandy loam at a pH between 6.0 and 7.0. Lovage has a long taproot and requires plenty of water. During summer, check the container every day and water thoroughly until moisture flows freely from the drainage holes. Harvest the leaves regularly and remove the flower stalks as soon as they appear to keep the foliage from becoming bitter. Because Lovage grows to such extraordinary heights, its survival depends completely on the weight and stability of the container beneath it. When its foundation is too light, the very height it works so hard to achieve can become the cause of its fall during a storm. As we pursue our own ambitions and reach toward greater heights, have we invested enough in the foundations beneath us? Have we built a strong and steady anchor of core values, self-care, and lasting relationships to keep us standing when the winds of change begin to rise? 10. Rhubarb, Rome Rhubarbarum, the power of transformation. And at last, we arrive at number 1, the undisputed crown jewel of the shaded container garden. Rhubarb, or Rome Rhubarbarum. Most gardeners believe this iconic perennial belongs only in enormous country gardens planted directly in the ground. But rhubarb grows beautifully in a spacious container, and even more surprisingly, genuinely benefits from afternoon shade. In warmer climates, relentless summer sunlight can scorch its leaves and weaken the entire plant. Giving it partial shade during the hottest part of the day helps preserve cool moisture around the roots, extends the harvest season, and encourages stalks that are remarkably tender and sweet. Rhubarb is a plant of bold and dramatic contrasts. Its thick, ruby-red stalks carry an intensely sharp, sour, tangy flavor that generations have celebrated in traditional pies and homemade jams. But this beautiful survivor also carries a strict warning. While the stalks are a culinary treasure, its enormous tropical-looking leaves contain toxic concentrations of oxalic acid and must never be eaten. To grow this masterpiece in a container, choose a very deep pot measuring at least 45 to 50 centimeters deep, with a capacity of 45 to 60 liters. This gives its massive fleshy crown and extensive root system enough room to develop. Fill the pot with an exceptionally rich growing mix, combining loam with at least 30% well-rotted manure or compost. Water deeply during dry periods and add a fresh layer of compost to the surface every spring to restore the nutrients. When harvesting, never cut the stalks. Instead, hold each stalk close to the base, then twist and pull gently until it separates cleanly from the crown. Rhubarb offers a masterclass in the art of transformation. On their own, its raw stalks are overwhelmingly sour, while its leaves are dangerous. Yet when those tart stalks are combined with a little warmth, patience, and sweetness, they are completely transformed into one of the most beloved and comforting desserts in history. How often do we encounter moments in life that feel intensely sour, bitter, or even painful? Rhubarb asks us whether we can hold those difficult experiences with patience. Can we bring them into the warmth of reflection, blend them with grace and sweetness, and transform our deepest struggles into a harvest of lasting wisdom? The permanent harvest. As the afternoon light begins to soften and the shadows stretch farther across my small, north-facing garden, I feel a deep sense of gratitude. The place I once dismissed as wasted and useless has become my favorite sanctuary. a quiet space of growth. By choosing to work with the conditions I was given instead of constantly fighting against them, and by choosing plants that have spent millions of years mastering the art of life in the shade, I have created something truly beautiful. This is the real magic of permaculture container gardening. We are not simply planting seeds that grow for one brief season before leaving our pots empty through winter. We are creating a living, permanent ecosystem of edible companions that become stronger, deeper rooted, and more resilient with every passing year. We are creating a permanent harvest. The next time you look toward a dark corner of your yard, a shaded balcony, or a patio enclosed by high walls, I hope you will not see a limitation. I hope you will see an invitation. An invitation to slow down, step away from the blinding heat of the sun, and discover the quiet, lasting wonders waiting to bloom in the shade. Thank you so much for joining me today on Earthly Delights. If this journey has inspired you to begin your own shaded container garden, tell me in the comments below which of these 10 perennial survivors surprised you the most. And do not forget to subscribe so we can continue exploring the beautiful, quiet magic of the earth together. Until next time, keep your hands in the soil, let nature surprise you, and happy gardening.